Things that get podcasters and podcast companies sued. Hi, I'm Gordon Firemark. I am the podcast lawyer, and I help creatives and business people in the podcasting industry cover their legal bases, protect themselves, and protect the things that they create. This is Legit Podcast Pro, a short weekly show where I offer you legal tips and information and strategies, and I answer your questions so you can grow your podcast like a pro. So here we go. In no particular order here, I'm going to tell you about some of the kinds of things that can get a podcaster sued. So let's just start right off. One that comes up for me from time to time, fairly frequently these days, is dumping a partner, getting rid of a co-host or a team member. Because breaking up is hard to do. You know, there's a law rule that a partnership exists, a de facto partnership exists whenever two or more people come together to do something, a business kind of a thing together, whether it's for profit or not. So unless you've got a prenup of sorts, a podcast prenup, a contract of some sort, whether it's an LLC operating agreement or a more basic partnership agreement, or something specific, something more specific to the way that you operate your show, do yourself a favor and get these things in writing. I want to say hello to Bashir. Thank you for being here. Who says, great seeing and hearing you. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. So if you're doing business with a partner, whether that's a co-producer or a co-host or a silent partner, whatever, if there is no written agreement between you, you will be treated under the law as partners. And generally that means equal in ownership and control and equal shares of revenue and those kinds of things. So you want to get these things in writing. And this is really true for all of the team members who help you create and produce and distribute your show, because you want to have written contracts with anybody who touches your show so that you have clarity about the intention of the parties, because trust me, you don't want the law reading things into it that aren't there. So, I mean, even if you are planning on everything being equal splitsies between everybody with control and ownership and everything shared, it makes sense to get all that in writing to cover the what ifs and what happens if somebody dies or gets disabled or decides to pull out and they don't want to work on it anymore, or someone's not pulling their weight or not contributing their share of the costs and expenses of things. So get these things in writing early so you don't have a fight about them later on, and so you have some recourse if somebody does drop out, pull out, die, whatever, so you have a roadmap and a strategy for dealing with it. Another way that podcasters get sued, another thing that gets podcasters sued, is their guests. Guests who change their minds, guests who have different ideas about how things should be done, guests who, for whatever reason, decide they don't like you years later. So get a release. Use that release every single time with every single guest. Practice safe guesting. I happen to offer a free podcast release over at podcastrelease.com that gives you the consent that you need to record and to publish the episode. It gives you the right to do that without any approvals or pre-publication review by the guest. And it gives you that permanently and irrevocably. It gives you full ownership of the content that you create together. Remember what I was saying earlier about copyright law. Authorship is ownership, and joint authors are people who come together and decide to create a thing, a single unitary thing, like an episode, together. Joint owners own it equally. So if there was an intent to make that single work, that podcast episode, and it was not clear between the parties that there was something other than a joint owner of the episode, guess what? You're going to have a problem. So get it in writing. The podcast release gives you a promise that they won't sue you, and it gives you a defense, a quick defense, if you do get sued, if there is a problem. And finally, it projects a kind of professionalism. I know there's a lot of folks out there who say, no, I worked in radio for 30 years and we never used releases. I was like, I'm here to tell you, Podcasting is not the same as radio. It's not the same business. It's not the same business model. And frankly, most podcasters, you're not as big as a radio station that has multi-million-dollar budgets every year and has lawyers on staff or on retainer who can deal with these things when they come up. And yeah, it's true. There is an implicit consent that happens, when somebody agrees to sit down in front of a microphone and talk to you. But the scope of that consent is very different in people's minds sometimes. Yeah, if it's going to be a live stream, are you also going to be publishing it as a recorded episode? If it's going to be recorded, are you also allowed to do other things with it? Can you adapt it and use that in making a book or creating an online course? All of these kinds of things need to be documented in your deal. And so it makes sense to have the professional podcast release written up. So go on over to podcastrelease.com and get the release that I offer. It's free. Just give me your email address and I'll send it over to you. Another way that podcasters find themselves in the crosshairs of legal action and lawsuit is privacy violations. Don't reveal people's private information in your podcast. Private information is stuff relating to their employment history. It's stuff relating to their education history. It's stuff relating to their health and medical history and the drugs they take and those kind of medicines, prescribed medicines, of course. All of those kinds of things are considered private information. So if you are talking about people on your show and they're not there to discuss it themselves, make sure you're doing your fact checking. Make sure that the things that you're talking about are already well known in public. They've already been made public through not your own, whatever. Or if they haven't, make sure that it's newsworthy to be talking about these things, that they're matters of public concern, so that you have a freedom of speech, freedom of press, journalism kind of a basis for arguing, well, we should be talking about this because it's important to know that such and such politician got a D average throughout college and law school or whatever, So if that becomes a matter of concern. Before you go to air with this kind of stuff, make sure it's not, strictly speaking, private information that would be either embarrassing for them to have released or that would create a false impression about the person, or that just, it's just private and they don't want it released. And certainly don't use hidden cameras and hidden microphones and those kinds of intrusions and invasions of privacy as well. Another way, this is a big one that I'm starting to see more and more, is when podcasters get the facts wrong. They're talking smack about people. They're talking about events that have happened. Defamation, libel is what we're usually talking about. Slander is the spoken word, small group kind of thing. Libel is what it is when it's using electronic media or mass media, those kinds of things, or printed in a newspaper, those kinds of things. Defamation covers libel and slander. It's false published statements that are of or concerning a particular person who's identifiable and that causes that person harm to their reputation or to their standing in the community. So this comes up a lot in the true crime reporting arena and in nonfiction storytelling. So be sure, really be certain that you've got the facts straight. Make sure you can corroborate from multiple sources. Keep really good notes and records. And just because somebody says it into your microphone doesn't mean you have to publish it. You need to make sure that if it's the kind of thing that could be harmful to a person's reputation, and sometimes just being at a place at a particular time can be harmful, make sure you can back it up. Do your own investigation. Do your own research. Do not just rely on others and others reporting and things like that. Before you accuse, be darn sure, because especially for the true crime arena, defamation per se is where the accusation is of a crime or of some kind of business impropriety, or that a woman is unchaste. Don't go calling people hookers and sluts if they're not, right? And if somebody has a loathsome disease. Those four kinds of accusations or allegations are considered per se. They're considered to be damaging and harmful to the person's reputation without any proof of actual damage or harm. And so a jury or a judge could make an award of damages just on the basis of those kinds of statements if proven to be false. So I want to just say right now, this episode is brought to you by the free Legit Podcast Pro community, where we help each other to grow and prosper with our podcasting ventures. So you can join this free organization right now by visiting legitpodcastpro.com. We have a community on Facebook, and we also do an email communications blast from time to time. Come on over to legitpodcastpro.com and become a part of that. And it's free, and I promise it's more of this kind of information, but also we're going to be doing a challenge, a podcast growth challenge coming up real soon. We're going to be doing some other kinds of fun stuff for podcasters. So come on over and join the fun. And now back to the regular scheduled programming. Let me tell you, another way, this is a big one, that people end up in the crosshairs of lawsuits, litigation, and just trouble, is using other people's stuff without their permission. Now, of course, you know I'm talking about copyright, right? I said earlier, copyright authorship of a work means that author is the owner. Authorship is ownership. It's not in the public domain for at least 95 years after the work is created, right? And first published. 95 years for older stuff. Now, new stuff, if I created something today, like this episode, 70 years after I die, it falls into the public domain. I own the copyright by virtue of the fact that I am the author of this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. So, public domain, not for 95 years. So if you're using something that is less than 95 years old, you run the risk of copyright infringement. And copyright covers all kinds of materials, not just the big one we always talk about here, music, which actually has two copyrights that we have to concern on. One is the musical composition, the song itself, and the other is the recording of the song. So there's two copyrighted works there. But it also covers things like photographs, spoken word, movie clips, audio clips, poetry, books, sculpture. All of these things are protected by copyright. I actually this may seem obvious, but someone out there just recently posted a question. Hey, what if I just read this book into a microphone and every chapter will be a new episode? Yeah, you can't do that unless it's a book that's more than 95 years old. In this case, they were talking about something fairly recent. Don't do that. Don't do that. You can do a book review. You can do a a sort of an accompanying work if you're talking about the book and what it teaches or what you learn from it or so on. Sort of book club style stuff. But you can't just read passages from or the whole chapter into the microphone. It just doesn't work. So don't use other people's stuff. And if you do want to use other people's stuff, something like a song or whatever, get some permission right from the beginning from the right parties in writing. So the process is identify what you want to use, identify the owner of the material, contact them, get permission, get it in writing. Sometimes they'll ask you for a payment. Sometimes they'll give it to you for free, or what we call gratis license. It's always fair to ask for gratis license, but don't expect to always get it. And one of the things about owning a copyright is that you have the right to say no to somebody using it if you don't want them to, in most instances. So another angle on this is plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is something that's been sort of rampant in the podcast space. We've had a lot of claims by journalists against podcasters who do, a lot of times it's in the true crime or the storytelling, nonfiction storytelling arena, where the podcaster's basically been sourcing all of their content from the material that these journalists have created. Now, they're rewording it, they're reworking it, they're doing whatever they're doing, but they're still really just sort of re-reporting somebody else's investigative work, and that's not okay. It may or may not rise to the level of copyright infringement, because if you change every word, even though you're telling the same story and articulating the same facts and referring to the same incidents, it may not be copyright infringement, but it is still plagiarism. It's still wrong, and it will still bring you a lot of trouble. There are other kinds of claims that can come in. One potential claim is something called unfair competition. It comes up under the Lanham Act, where you're sort of passing off someone else's work as your own, or passing your work off as somebody else's. Those kinds of things, not okay, and it can bring you lots and lots of trouble. Now, another area where we see podcasters getting nailed by lawsuits in this arena is ad deals. Ad deals that have gone wrong, or ad deals that haven't been properly written up in the first place. Just make sure you're using good contracts. Make sure you're defining things properly in detail. clearly so there are no misunderstandings. You've heard me talk before about the $1,000 per podcast structure. And did that mean per episode, or did that mean for the whole season or the whole series, or what? And there was, of course, a $51,000 misunderstanding over that one. So make sure you get these things clear and in writing. It seems simple, it seems basic. You'd be amazed how often people don't bother. And finally, get the things in writing and then abide by the terms of your contracts. Do what you say you're going to do. And if something goes wrong and you mess up and you leave an ad out of an episode or something, or you say it wrong, or whatever, then use what we call make goods. Do the right thing. Give them another episode of advertising, another ad spot or something, as in exchange for the mistake. Don't be stingy or weird about these kinds of things. Just get it done. Get it done. So abide by your contracts. Use those make goods. So those are a few of the kinds of things that will get podcasters and podcast companies sued. Now, the best solution to avoiding these kinds of problems is, well, I mean, the best one is hire me as your lawyer and let me vet everything. But no, the real solution is get things in writing whenever it's possible. Define ownership and control and financial terms. That's super important. Articulate things properly in the contract. Be clear about who gets what, when they get it, and those kinds of things. And if it's an ad deal, make sure you define all those terms properly. Now, if you, like many podcasters, are the do-it-yourself type, please head on over to, let me get this up on the screen here, head on over to podcastlawforms.com, where you will find a library of most of the kinds of legal documents that you're going to need for your podcasting adventure, all for a fraction of what you would pay me or any other lawyer for custom done for you contracts. If you're the do-it-yourselfer type, if you think you prefer to have somebody doing it right for you, I just realized my microphone is set wrong all this time. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's better. If you are not the do-it-yourselfer type and you would like someone to do it for you, of course, reach out to me. But that's it. That's it. Yeah. So check out podcastlawforms.com and find what you need there. And that is about it for this episode. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. And that's it for this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Sorry about the bad sound. I'll see you again soon. That's next Thursday. Thursdays at 4 is when we do this. Until then, have a great week.